I stood there in the freezing rain outside our childhood home in Denver, watching my brother Marcus load a genuine leather sofa, worth more than my monthly salary, into his moving truck. 3 weeks had passed since Mom and Dad died in that horrific car accident on Interstate 25. Yesterday's will reading still echoed in my ears like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. Marcus inherited the stunning family estate valued at $800,000, complete with its manicured gardens and mountain views. Me, I got some crumbling shack in the middle of nowhere, Montana, that nobody in our family had even visited in decades. My wife Sarah's voice cut through the storm from our apartment window, above, screaming that I was pathetic for accepting this injustice without a fight, hurling my battered suitcase onto the soaking pavement below. The humiliation from yesterday's meeting at Benjamin Walsh's law office burned fresh in my memory as I picked up my soggy clothes from the sidewalk. Walsh had been our family attorney for over 20 years, a nervous man in his 70s who constantly adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses and cleared his throat before delivering bad news. The reading had taken place in his cramped downtown office that smelled of old coffee and legal documents. Marcus had arrived 15 minutes early, wearing his expensive charcoal suit, and that smug expression I'd grown to hate over 32 years of being his younger brother. He'd made small talk about his latest real estate development project, while we waited, casually mentioning the luxury condos he was building in Cherry Creek. Sarah sat beside me, her manicured nails drumming impatiently against her leather purse, checking her phone every 30 seconds. When Walsh finally began reading Dad's will, the words felt like physical blows. To my eldest son, Marcus William Hayes, I leave the family residence at 1527 Aspen Ridge Drive, along with all furnishings, vehicles, and financial accounts. Marcus had leaned back in his chair, that satisfied smile spreading across his face like he'd just won the lottery. Then came my portion. To my youngest son, Clinton James Hayes, I leave the property located at 442 Wilderness Creek Road, Copper Falls, Montana, including all structures and 40 acres of surrounding land. Walsh had paused there, glancing up nervously. The property description continued with technical legal language about mineral rights and easements that meant nothing to me at the time. Sarah's face had turned bright red. She'd grabbed my arm hard enough to leave bruises and hissed, "Contest it. Right now. This is obviously a mistake." But something in Dad's final letter, read aloud by Walsh, had stopped me cold. Dad wrote that he'd given each son what he believed they needed most and that understanding would come with time. Marcus had actually laughed out loud. Clint gets some abandoned dump in Montana, while I inherit prime real estate in Denver. Sounds about right to me. He'd stood up and shaken Walsh's hand, already making plans to move into the house immediately. The drive home had been silent except for Sarah's angry breathing. She'd stared out the passenger window, her jaw clenched tight. Once we reached our modest apartment, the explosion finally came. 28 years old, and you still let your big brother walk all over you, she'd screamed, throwing her purse across our tiny living room. This is exactly why I've been talking to Patricia about divorce lawyers. You never fight for anything, Clint. Not for your job, not for respect, and certainly not for what's rightfully yours. I tried to explain that Mom and Dad must have had their reasons, that maybe the Montana property had some value we didn't understand. Sarah had laughed bitterly. Value. It's a shack in the wilderness that your family forgot existed. Marcus probably convinced your parents you didn't deserve anything better. The argument had escalated when I'd suggested we at least look at the property before making any decisions. Sarah had called me spineless, weak, and a disappointment. She'd listed every time I'd backed down from confrontation, every promotion at the construction company I'd let slip by without fighting, every family gathering where I'd let Marcus dominate conversations and diminish my accomplishments. Your brother called me yesterday. She'd finally admitted, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. He offered me a position at his real estate firm. Said I deserved someone who could provide the kind of life I wanted. The implication hung between us like poison gas. That's when she delivered her ultimatum. Don't come back until you grow a backbone and fight for what's yours. I'm tired of being married to someone who accepts scraps from his family's table. She'd thrown her wedding ring at my chest, the small diamond catching the lamplight one last time before bouncing across our hardwood floor. Now, standing in the rain with my soaked belongings, I realized Sarah was right about one thing. I'd spent my entire life accepting whatever Marcus left behind. In elementary school, I'd gotten his hand-me-down clothes and toys. In high school, I'd dated girls only after he'd lost interest in them. Even my job in construction had come through connections Marcus had made first. Marcus emerged from the house carrying Mom's antique china cabinet, the one she'd inherited from her mother. He saw me standing there and paused, rain dripping from his perfectly styled hair. "You know, little brother," he called out, "if you ever want to sell that Montana place, I might know some buyers. Though honestly, it's probably only worth the land it sits on. Maybe 20,000 if you're lucky." The casual cruelty in his voice finally sparked something inside me. "I'll think about it," I replied, surprising myself with how steady my voice sounded. Marcus grinned and continued loading furniture. He had no idea that his offhand comment had just made my decision for me. I was going to Montana not to sell the property, but to find out why Dad had thought it was worth leaving to me. The drive to Montana stretched out like a meditation on failure. 12 hours through Colorado's mountains, across Wyoming's endless plains, and into the rugged wilderness of Big Sky country. My beat-up Ford pickup truck coughed and wheezed as we climbed elevation, its engine protesting the weight of everything I owned, crammed into the bed and covered with a blue tarp. Somewhere around hour 8, my GPS signal disappeared completely. The last town I had seen was 3 hours behind me, and the road had narrowed from 4 lanes to 2, then to a winding strip of cracked asphalt that seemed to lead nowhere. Mountain peaks surrounded me like ancient guardians, their snow-capped summits disappearing into low-hanging clouds. When I finally saw the weathered sign reading, "Copper Falls Population 247," relief flooded through me. The town consisted of a single main street, lined with buildings that looked like they hadn't been updated since the 1970s. A small grocery store, a post office, a gas station, with 2 pumps and a diner called Maggie's Place comprised the entire business district. I parked outside the diner, my truck's engine ticking as it cooled down. Through the windows I could see red vinyl booths and a lunch counter with chrome stools. A bell chimed when I pushed through the glass door, and the smell of coffee and fried food made my empty stomach growl loudly. The waitress behind the counter had silver hair pulled back in a neat bun, and kind eyes that crinkled at the corners. She looked up from wiping down coffee cups and smiled warmly. "Well, you're definitely not from around here," she said, her voice carrying a slight Montana drawl. "I'm Dorothy. What can I get you, honey?" I ordered coffee and asked for directions to 442 Wilderness Creek Road. The moment I mentioned the address, Dorothy's smile vanished. Her face went pale, and she set down the coffee pot with shaking hands. "The Mackenzie place," she whispered, glancing around the empty diner like she was afraid someone might overhear. "Nobody's been out there for 30 years, maybe more. What business do you have with that property?" "I inherited it," I explained, "from my father. My name is Clint Hayes." Dorothy's eyes widened. "Hayes, you're related to Thomas Mackenzie?" She studied my face intently, as if searching for familiar features. "Lord have mercy, you look just like him around the eyes." Same serious expression he used to get when he was thinking hard about something. She poured my coffee with trembling hands and sat down across from me in the booth. "Your grandfather was a good man, but he got mixed up in something that split your family apart. That's why nobody talks about the old place anymore. Too many painful memories buried out there." I pressed her for details, but Dorothy just shook her head. Some secrets are better left alone, honey. But if you're determined to go out there, take the county road north for about 15 miles. You'll see a rusty mailbox with Mackenzie painted on it, though most of the letters have faded away. The driveway is about half a mile long, all gravel and potholes. Road gets pretty rough this time of year. She wrote directions on a napkin and handed it to me along with a thermos of fresh coffee. You be careful out there. That house has been empty for so long, could be animals or structural damage. And Clint, she touched my arm gently. Whatever you find out there, remember that your grandfather loved his family more than anything. He made some hard choices, but they came from a good place. The drive to the property took another hour on increasingly rough roads. Pine trees pressed close on both sides, and I passed maybe 3 other driveways in the entire 15 miles. When I finally spotted the rusted mailbox Dorothy had described, my heart started pounding with nervous anticipation. The driveway was every bit as rough as she'd warned. My truck bounced and lurched through potholes deep enough to swallow a tire. Branches scraped against the windows as the path curved through dense forest. Just when I was starting to worry I'd taken a wrong turn, the trees opened up into a large clearing. The house that emerged from the wilderness took my breath away, though not for the reasons I'd expected. It was a 2-story Victorian home with elaborate gingerbread trim and wraparound porches on both levels. The bones of the structure were magnificent, built with the kind of craftsmanship that didn't exist anymore. But decades of neglect had taken their toll. Paint peeled from the siding in long strips that fluttered in the mountain breeze. Several windows were broken, their glass lying in sparkling piles on the porch below. Weeds and small trees had grown up around the foundation, and the roof sagged in places where snow loads had stressed the supports beyond their limits. I climbed out of the truck and walked slowly around the exterior, my construction-trained eye automatically assessing the damage. Despite its appearance, the foundation looked solid. The stonework was premium quality, laid by someone who understood structural integrity. The framing was built with old-growth lumber that would cost a fortune today. As I examined the details more closely, confusion began to replace my initial disappointment. This wasn't the worthless shack everyone had described. Even in its current condition, the house represented serious money. The foundation alone would cost over $100,000 to build today. The custom millwork and hand-carved details spoke of wealth and attention to quality that few families could afford. Why had everyone in my family described this place as worthless? And why had my grandfather abandoned such a beautiful home to decay in the wilderness? I pulled out my phone to take pictures, but of course there was no signal this far from civilization. The silence was complete except for wind through the pine trees and the distant sound of running water that must be Wilderness Creek. Standing there in that isolated clearing surrounded by mountains and memories, I didn't understand. I felt something shift inside me. For the first time since the will reading, I wasn't thinking about what I'd lost. I was wondering what I'd found. The front door was solid oak, warped from years of weather, but still hanging straight on its wrought iron hinges. I tried the handle and was surprised when it turned easily. The door swung open with a groan that echoed through the empty house like a ghost awakening from a long sleep. Sunlight streaming through broken windows illuminated a front hallway that was far grander than I'd expected. A carved wooden staircase curved upward to the second floor, its banister dusty but intact. Hardwood floors stretched beneath years of accumulated debris, their quality visible despite the neglect. I stepped inside, carefully testing each floorboard before putting my full weight down. The house was larger than it appeared from outside, with rooms opening off the main hallway like chambers in a hidden palace. Each space was filled with furniture covered in white sheets that looked like sleeping spirits in the dim light. The front parlor contained a massive stone fireplace with an intricately carved mantelpiece. Photographs in silver frames lined the mantel, their subjects obscured by dust and age. When I wiped one clean with my sleeve, my grandfather's young face looked back at me. He stood beside a beautiful woman I didn't recognize, both of them smiling, in front of this very house when it was new and magnificent. More photographs revealed glimpses of family life from decades past. Children playing in the yard where weeds now grew. Holiday gatherings around a dining table that still sat in the next room. My grandfather in work clothes, standing beside surveying equipment mountains visible in the background. The kitchen was a time capsule from the 1970s. Avocado green appliances and harvest gold countertops that were probably the height of fashion when they were installed. But even here, quality showed through. The cabinets were solid wood with dovetail joints that hadn't loosened despite the years. The floor was genuine slate that would cost thousands to install today. I climbed the stairs to the second floor, each step creaking a different note like an old song. 4 bedrooms opened off the upstairs hallway, each filled with more sheet-covered furniture. The master bedroom at the end of the hall was enormous, with windows on 3 sides that offered panoramic views of the surrounding mountains. It was there, behind an antique bookshelf in the corner of the master bedroom, that I made my first real discovery. The bookshelf didn't sit flush against the wall. When I pushed against it experimentally, it swung inward on hidden hinges, revealing a small room I never would have known existed. The hidden space was about the size of a walk-in closet with no windows and walls lined with built-in shelves. Those shelves were packed with leather-bound journals, rolled papers, and metal filing boxes that looked like they'd been placed there recently rather than decades ago. I pulled down one of the journals and opened it to the first page. Property of Thomas Mackenzie, Geological Survey. Notes 1974. Was written in careful handwriting across the top. My grandfather's name, but I'd never known he was involved in geological work. As I read through the entries, an incredible story began to unfold. My grandfather hadn't been a simple farmer or rancher, as family stories had suggested. He'd been a geologist with advanced training from the Colorado School of Mines. During the oil crisis of the 70s, he'd used his expertise to identify potential mineral deposits throughout this region of Montana. Entry after entry detailed his research. Soil samples analyzed for mineral content, topographical surveys marking unusual rock formations, correspondence with mining equipment companies about extraction possibilities, and most importantly, detailed maps showing exactly where valuable deposits lay beneath the surface. According to his notes, my grandfather had spent nearly a decade quietly buying up mineral rights to thousands of acres surrounding this property. Not just the 40 acres I'd inherited, but mineral rights extending for miles in every direction. He'd used every penny of the family's money borrowed against future earnings and leveraged everything he owned to secure those rights. The journals explained why the family had split apart. My grandmother had thought he was throwing away their financial security on wild theories about underground treasure. Other family members had accused him of gambling with their inheritance. The stress had torn relationships apart and driven people away from the property. But my grandfather had been proven right. His final journal entries, dated just months before his death, contained official geological survey reports confirming massive deposits of copper, lithium, and rare earth elements beneath the land. The technology to extract them profitably hadn't existed in the 70s and 80s, but his notes showed he'd believed that would change with time. The last journal I opened wasn't written in my grandfather's handwriting. This one was much more recent, dated just 5 years ago and written by my father. The first page made my heart race. For my son Clinton when he's ready to understand the truth about his inheritance. Dad's letter explained everything I'd been wondering about since the will reading. He'd known about the mineral rights all along. My grandfather had shared the secret with him before dying, making him promise to protect the land until technology and markets made extraction profitable. Marcus would sell this property immediately for whatever quick profit he could get, Dad had written. He's never understood the value of patience or long-term planning. But you, Clint, have always been willing to work steadily toward distant goals. You understand that some things are worth more than their immediate market value. The letter went on to explain that recent advances in mining technology had finally made the deposits economically viable. Dad had been planning to tell me about the inheritance directly, but the car accident had prevented our final conversation. The mineral rights alone are worth more than everything else our family has ever owned combined, he'd written. But more than that, they represent your grandfather's dream of leaving something meaningful to future generations. He believed this land could provide sustainable wealth for decades to come. I sat in that hidden room for hours, reading through documents that completely changed my understanding of my inheritance. This wasn't some consolation prize or leftover property nobody else wanted. It was the culmination of one man's lifetime of careful research and strategic planning. My grandfather had been a visionary who'd seen potential where others saw only wilderness. My father had been a guardian who'd preserved that vision until the right moment arrived. And now somehow that responsibility had passed to me. But the most shocking revelation was still to come. At the bottom of the last filing box, I found a sealed envelope with my name written across the front in Dad's distinctive handwriting. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a phone number and a note that made my hands shake. When you're ready to claim your inheritance, call this number. Ask for Frank Rodriguez. Tell him Thomas Mackenzie's grandson is ready to finish what was started. The surveys are complete, the technology is available, and the permits have been approved. Everything is waiting for you to say yes. As I sat there in the growing darkness of that hidden room surrounded by decades of family secrets, I realized my life had just changed in ways I couldn't even begin to comprehend. The drive back to Copper Falls felt like floating through a dream where everything familiar had been transformed into something miraculous. My mind raced with questions and possibilities as I navigated the rough mountain roads, in darkness, guided only by my truck's headlights cutting through the Montana wilderness. Maggie's place was closed when I arrived back in town, but I could see lights in the apartments above the diner. I knocked on the side door until Dorothy appeared wearing a quilted robe and looking concerned. "Clint? What are you doing back here so late you look like you've seen a ghost?" "I need to use a computer with internet access," I said, probably sounding half crazy. "It's urgent. I'll pay whatever it costs." Dorothy studied my face in the porch light, then nodded slowly. "Come on up. My grandson left his laptop when he visited last month." She led me upstairs to a cozy apartment that smelled of cinnamon and old books. The laptop was ancient by technology standards, but it connected to Dorothy's wireless internet. I spent the next 3 hours researching everything I could find about mineral extraction, rare earth elements, and current market prices for the materials mentioned in my grandfather's journals. What I discovered left me speechless. Rare earth elements had become incredibly valuable due to their essential role in renewable energy technology. Electric car batteries, wind turbine magnets, solar panel components, all dependent on materials that were becoming increasingly scarce and expensive. Copper prices had tripled since my grandfather's time. Lithium was worth more than gold. But the real treasure was the rare earth deposits which commanded prices that seemed impossible to believe. I called the number my father had left even though it was past midnight. A sleepy voice answered on the fourth ring. "Rodriguez Geological Services, this is Frank." "Mr. Rodriguez, my name is Clint Hayes. I'm Thomas Mackenzie's grandson. My father left me a note saying I should call you." There was a long pause, then the voice became suddenly alert. "Clint Hayes? I've been waiting for this call for 5 years. Are you at the property?" "I'm in Copper Falls. I found my grandfather's journals and my father's letter." "Then you know what you've inherited. Can you meet me tomorrow afternoon? I'm in Billings, about 4 hours from you. There's a lot we need to discuss." Frank Rodriguez turned out to be a man in his 70s with weathered hands and eyes that missed nothing. We met at a truck stop restaurant halfway between Copper Falls and Billings, where he spread geological survey maps across a corner booth and explained exactly what my inheritance meant. "Your grandfather was 30 years ahead of his time," Frank said, pointing to detailed topographical charts covered in colored markings. "He understood geology in ways that most people still don't. These deposits represent some of the purest concentrations of rare earth elements ever found in North America." The numbers Frank showed me were staggering. Conservative estimates valued the extractable minerals at $18 million. More optimistic projections suggested the total value could reach $30 million or more as technology improved and demand increased. But here's the really impressive part. Frank continued, pulling out a thick folder of official documents. "Your grandfather didn't just identify these deposits. He secured mineral rights to most of this entire mountain range. We're talking about thousands of acres of mineral-rich land that you now control." I stared at the maps, trying to process the magnitude of what I was seeing. "Why didn't anyone in my family know about this?" Frank's expression grew serious. "Your grandfather made some enemies when he started buying up mineral rights. Local ranchers thought he was trying to steal their land. Mining companies wanted to acquire his rights for a fraction of their value. Some people even accused him of fraud when he couldn't prove the deposits existed with 70s technology. The family split apart because they thought he was wasting money on crazy theories," Frank explained. "Your grandmother left him. Your father's siblings stopped speaking to him. By the time the geological surveys proved him right, most of the family had written him off as an obsessed old man. But your father believed," Frank continued. "He and I stayed in touch over the years, updating surveys and monitoring technological developments. We were waiting for the right time to begin extraction." Frank opened his briefcase and pulled out a contract from a renewable energy consortium based in Seattle. This company specializes in environmentally responsible mineral extraction. They've agreed to pay premium rates for exclusive access to your deposits with guaranteed royalty payments over 15 years. The contract terms were beyond anything I could have imagined. An immediate signing bonus of $2 million. Annual royalty payments starting at $800,000 and increasing based on production levels. Environmental protections ensuring the land would be restored after extraction was complete. Your grandfather's dream was to create sustainable wealth that could benefit future generations without destroying the land, Frank said. This contract makes that possible. As we drove back toward the property for Frank to conduct updated surveys, my phone rang. Marcus's name appeared on the caller ID, and suddenly I remembered the world I'd left behind. "Little brother, how's your vacation in the wilderness?" Marcus's voice carried its usual condescending tone. "I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday. I might be willing to go as high as $50,000 for that Montana property, assuming it's not completely worthless." I looked out at the mountain landscape that contained millions of dollars in mineral wealth and almost started laughing. "That's generous of you, Marcus. Can I think about it?" "Sure, but don't take too long. I've got buyers who might be interested in that kind of land for hunting cabins or something. Though honestly, it's probably only worth what someone will pay for the acreage." After I ended the call, Frank glanced at me curiously. "Family member?" "My brother. He inherited my parents' house in Denver and thinks I got cheated out of my fair share." Frank chuckled. "Something tells me he's about to get a very different perspective on fairness." Back at the property, Frank spent hours taking soil samples and verifying his previous survey data. Everything checked out exactly as the journals had indicated. The deposits were real valuable and ready for extraction whenever I decided to proceed. As the sun set behind the mountains, I sat on the front porch of my grandfather's house and tried to absorb the complete transformation of my circumstances. 24 hours ago, I'd been a failed construction worker whose wife and brother both considered him worthless. Now I was potentially one of the wealthiest men in Montana. But the real revelation wasn't about money. It was about understanding that my father had seen something in me that Marcus and Sarah had missed: patience, perseverance, the ability to appreciate long-term value over immediate gratification. My grandfather had spent his lifetime preparing this gift, not just for his family, but specifically for someone who would honor his vision and protect his legacy. My father had recognized that person in me even when I couldn't see it in myself. Tomorrow I'd have some very interesting phone calls to make. I spent the next morning in Frank's motel room in Copper Falls, learning everything I could about mineral extraction law and business contracts. Frank had brought boxes of documents spanning decades of research, legal work, and negotiations with potential partners. The most important thing to understand, Frank explained, is that you don't have to make any decisions quickly. These deposits have waited millions of years to be discovered. They can wait a few more months while you get comfortable with your options. But as we worked through the paperwork, my phone kept buzzing with increasingly urgent calls from Marcus. I let them go to voicemail until curiosity finally got the better of me. "Clint, we need to talk immediately," his voice said on the recording. "I've been doing research on that Montana property, and I think there might be some legal complications with the mineral rights. Call me back." The next message was more direct. "I'm driving up there tomorrow with a real estate attorney. Don't sign anything or talk to anyone until we get this straightened out." Frank looked concerned when I played the messages. "How would your brother know about mineral rights?" "That information isn't public record." I thought about Marcus's connections in the real estate business, his network of attorneys and development contacts. If he'd started making inquiries about the property, someone might have mentioned the old mining claims or geological surveys. "He's probably just fishing for information," I said. "But maybe I should call him back and see what he knows." When Marcus answered his phone, his tone was friendly but urgent. "Clint, thank God. Listen, I've been making some calls about your property, and there might be serious legal issues. Some old mining claims that could affect your ownership. I've got an attorney who specializes in this kind of thing, and we're driving up tomorrow to help you sort it out." "That's not necessary, Marcus. I can handle whatever legal issues there are." "Look, little brother, this is complicated stuff that requires professional expertise. These mining companies will try to take advantage of you if they think you don't understand the law. I'm trying to protect your interests here." Something in his voice didn't sound right. Marcus had never shown any interest in protecting my interests before. "Who are you bringing with you?" "Just my attorney, a guy named Patterson, who handles mineral rights cases all the time. And maybe Sarah, since she's been worried about you driving off into the wilderness alone." The mention of Sarah made my stomach tighten. "Sarah's coming. She feels terrible about the fight you had. She wants to apologize and make sure you're okay. We could all drive back to Denver together once we get this property situation figured out." I agreed to meet them the next day, but something felt wrong about the whole conversation. Marcus had never shown interest in helping me with anything, and Sarah's sudden concern seemed suspicious after her ultimatum about not coming back until I stood up for myself. That evening, Dorothy invited me to dinner at her apartment above the diner. She'd prepared pot roast with vegetables from her garden, and we ate while she told me stories about my grandfather during his years in Copper Falls. "Thomas was the smartest man I ever knew," she said, refilling my coffee cup. "But smart doesn't always make you happy. He carried a heavy burden knowing what was under that land, but not being able to prove it to anyone who mattered." "Were you close?" I asked. Dorothy smiled sadly. "We dated for a while in the 70s before your grandmother came back into the picture. Thomas was torn between his geological research and his family responsibilities. He chose family, but I think he always wondered what might have been." She disappeared into her bedroom and returned with a small wooden box. "He left this with me before he died, said it should go to whichever grandson understood the value of patience. Inside the box were my grandfather's original geological survey notes written in his own hand, along with a letter addressed to my grandson who chooses wisdom over wealth." The letter was beautiful and heartbreaking. My grandfather wrote about his dreams for the land, his hopes that future generations would use its resources responsibly and his certainty that the right person would eventually inherit his life's work. I've hidden my research so that only someone truly interested in understanding will discover it, he wrote. Quick profit seekers will see only surface value. But the grandson who takes time to explore, to read, and to appreciate what came before will find the real treasure. The next morning, Marcus arrived in a convoy that looked more like an invasion than a family visit. His luxury SUV was followed by a second vehicle carrying two men in expensive suits, and behind them came a rental car with Sarah at the wheel. I met them in the clearing in front of the house, with Frank standing beside me for moral support. Marcus climbed out of his SUV wearing his most charming smile, but I could see calculation behind his eyes. "Clint, you look good, little brother. Mountain air agrees with you." He gestured toward his companions. "This is James Patterson, the attorney I mentioned, and his associate David Chen. They've been researching your property situation." Patterson was a thin man with nervous energy who immediately began unpacking briefcases full of documents. "Mr. Hayes, we've uncovered some serious complications with this property's mineral rights. There are competing claims dating back decades that could invalidate your ownership." Sarah approached more hesitantly, her usual confidence replaced by something that looked almost like guilt. "Clint, I'm sorry about our fight. I was angry and said things I didn't mean. I've missed you." But I was watching Marcus, seeing how his attention kept drifting to Frank and the survey equipment visible near our vehicles. His casual questions about what we'd been doing were a little too casual. "So what exactly have you been up to out here?" Marcus asked. "Besides camping in a house with no electricity or running water?" "Just exploring my inheritance," I replied, learning about family history. Patterson spread his documents across the hood of Marcus's SUV. "The problem is these overlapping mineral claims from the 1980s. Several mining companies filed prospecting rights that could supersede your grandfather's ownership. We'd need to contest these claims in court, which could take years and cost hundreds of thousands in legal fees." I glanced at Frank, who was frowning at Patterson's documents. Something wasn't right about the legal papers being presented. "Of course," Patterson continued, "there might be a simpler solution. If you were to transfer ownership to an experienced real estate developer who could handle these legal complications, you might be able to avoid the litigation entirely." "Someone like Marcus?" I asked. "Well, I couldn't recommend a specific buyer," Patterson said with a straight face. "But an experienced developer would know how to resolve these mineral rights issues efficiently." Marcus put his arm around my shoulder in what looked like a brotherly gesture, but felt like a claim of ownership. "I know this is overwhelming, Clint. Why don't you let me handle the complicated legal stuff? I could take the property off your hands for a fair price deal with all the paperwork and court cases, and you could walk away with cash in your pocket." "How much cash?" I asked. $75,000, Marcus said. "More than the property would sell for on the open market considering all these legal problems." Sarah moved closer, touching my arm gently. "We could use that money to make a fresh start, Clint. Put this whole inheritance mess behind us and focus on our marriage." I looked at Sarah's face, searching for the woman I'd married 5 years ago. What I saw instead was someone who'd clearly been coached on what to say. "Our marriage?" I repeated. "The same marriage you wanted to end 3 days ago." Sarah's composure cracked slightly. "I was angry. People say stupid things when they're angry. Marcus helped me realize that we should be working together instead of fighting." "Marcus helped you realize that—" I turned to study my brother's expression and saw the moment when his patience ran out. The charming smile disappeared, replaced by the arrogant smirk I remembered from childhood. "Look, Clint, let's stop playing games," Marcus said. "You're in over your head here. This property has serious legal complications that require professional expertise. I'm offering you a way out that puts money in your pocket and gets you back to your normal life. And what do you get out of this generous offer?" "I get a complicated legal mess that will probably cost me more money than it's worth," Marcus replied. "But I'm willing to take that risk to help family." Patterson nodded earnestly. "Mr. Hayes, I have to advise you that fighting these mineral rights claims could result in you losing the property entirely. At least this way you'd receive fair compensation. I pulled out my phone and started recording the conversation. Let me make sure I understand this correctly. You're saying there are legal problems with my mineral rights, and the solution is for me to sell the property to Marcus for $75,000. Clint, what are you doing? Sarah asked nervously. Just making sure I have everyone's advice recorded clearly. Marcus's expression darkened. You don't need to record family conversations, little brother. Actually, I think I do, I replied, keeping the phone running. Because something tells me this isn't really about family. That's when Patterson made his fatal mistake. He pulled out a document that was supposed to be evidence of conflicting mineral claims, but Frank recognized it immediately. This is a fraudulent mining claim, Frank announced loudly enough for my phone to pick up clearly. I filed the original surveys for this area in 1979. This document has been backdated and falsified. Marcus's face went red. Who is this guy you can't trust some local prospector over licensed attorneys? Frank Rodriguez, licensed geological surveyor certified by the state of Montana, Frank replied calmly. And I can prove these documents have been altered to create false, conflicting claims. The confrontation exploded from there. Marcus accused Frank of being a con artist trying to manipulate me. Patterson insisted his documents were legitimate. Sarah begged everyone to calm down and work together. But I wasn't listening to any of them anymore. I was watching Marcus's face and finally seeing him clearly for the first time in my life. How long have you known about the mineral deposits? I asked directly. Marcus's silence was answer enough. How long have you been planning to steal my inheritance? Nobody's stealing anything, Marcus snapped. I'm trying to save you from making a huge mistake. By offering me $75,000 for property worth millions, that's when Sarah made her own fatal mistake. Millions, Clint? That's ridiculous. It's just an old house in the wilderness. How would you know what it's worth, Sarah, unless someone's been discussing it with you? The truth came spilling out in the worst possible way. Marcus and Sarah had been in contact since before our parents died. Marcus had encouraged Sarah's frustration with me, promised her a better life if she pushed me toward divorce. When the will was read and he learned about the Montana property, he'd researched the mineral rights and discovered what I'd inherited. We were trying to protect you, Sarah said weakly. Marcus said you'd never be able to handle this kind of responsibility. So you decided to handle it for me. Marcus stepped forward aggressively. You've never handled responsibility in your life, Clint. You let other people make decisions for you and then complain when things don't work out. At least this way, everyone wins. Everyone except me. You get $75,000 and a wife who stays married to you, Marcus shot back. That's more than you deserve. I held up my phone, still recording. So just to be clear, you've been having an affair with my wife. You forged legal documents to steal my inheritance, and you think I should be grateful for the opportunity to be cheated. The murderous look in Marcus's eyes told me everything I needed to know about his real feelings toward me. But I was done being the little brother who accepted whatever scraps Marcus left behind. Dorothy, I called toward the house where she'd been watching from the porch. Could you call Sheriff Bradley? I think he'll be very interested in these forged mining documents. Marcus made one last desperate play. You can't prove those documents are forged. It's your word against licensed attorneys. That's when Frank smiled and pulled out his own briefcase. Actually, I have the original mineral rights documents signed by your grandfather and notarized by the county clerk in 1978. Every mineral claim in this area is documented and legitimate. What your attorney is presenting are crude forgeries that won't hold up to any professional examination. The sound of sirens in the distance meant Dorothy had made her call. Sarah grabbed my arm desperately. Clint, please, we can work this out. I made a mistake, but we can fix this. I looked at her hand on my arm, then up at her face. You're right, Sarah. You did make a mistake. You chose the wrong brother." As Sheriff Bradley's patrol car came up the gravel driveway, I realized I was no longer the man who'd driven up this mountain 3 days ago. That man would have been intimidated by Marcus's threats and swayed by Sarah's tears. This man had learned something about his own worth. Sheriff Tom Bradley was exactly what you'd expect from a small-town Montana lawman. Tall, weathered, with a mustache that had probably been out of style for 20 years, and eyes that missed nothing important. He listened to Frank's explanation of the forged documents while examining Patterson's paperwork with the careful attention of someone who'd seen plenty of fraud attempts over the years. "These mining claims are definitely falsified," he concluded after comparing them to Frank's originals. "The filing dates are wrong, the legal descriptions don't match county records, and the notary stamps are obvious forgeries." Patterson tried to bluster about jurisdiction and due process, but Bradley cut him off. "Son, I've been working mineral rights cases in this county for 35 years. I know what legitimate documents look like, and these aren't them." Marcus made one last attempt to control the situation. "Sheriff, this is obviously a misunderstanding. Perhaps we could resolve this without involving the legal system." "Mr. Hayes, are you suggesting I ignore evidence of fraud and forgery?" Bradley's tone made it clear that suggestion wasn't welcome. While the sheriff took statements and examined evidence, I walked to the edge of the clearing where I could think clearly. Frank joined me carrying a thick folder of documents I hadn't seen before. "There's something else you need to know," he said quietly. "Your grandfather's mineral rights aren't limited to this 40-acre property. He acquired rights to most of this entire mountain range. We're talking about nearly 8,000 acres of mineral-rich land." Frank opened his folder to reveal maps marking mineral deposits across an area that stretched for miles in every direction. "Your inheritance isn't just the house and 40 acres. You control the mineral rights to one of the largest rare earth deposits in North America." The scope of what my grandfather had accomplished was staggering. He'd spent decades quietly acquiring rights from ranchers and small landowners who had no idea what lay beneath their property. The total value was beyond anything I'd imagined. "Conservative estimates put the total extraction value at $45 million, Frank continued. "But with new processing techniques being developed, that number could go much higher." I studied the maps, trying to comprehend the magnitude of my inheritance. "Why didn't my father tell me any of this directly?" "He wanted you to discover it yourself," Frank explained. "He said anyone who would take the time to explore the property, read the journals, and understand your grandfather's vision was someone who could be trusted with this kind of responsibility." Behind us, I could hear Marcus arguing with Sheriff Bradley about the validity of the arrest. Patterson and his associate were already in handcuffs facing charges for fraud and conspiracy. Sarah sat in the back of Marcus's SUV crying and making phone calls to someone who clearly wasn't answering. "What happens now?" I asked Frank. "That's entirely up to you. The Renewable Energy Consortium is still interested in their original offer, but now that we know the full scope of the deposits, they'll probably want to renegotiate. There are also 3 other companies that have expressed interest." Frank pulled out his phone and showed me emails that had arrived just that morning. Word was apparently spreading through the mineral extraction industry about the Montana discovery. Companies were already competing for the rights to bid on extraction contracts. "You're about to become one of the most sought-after people in the rare earth mining business," Frank said with a smile. "I hope you're ready for some very interesting conversations." Sheriff Bradley approached us, notebook in hand. "Mr. Hayes, I'll need a complete statement about your brother's attempts to defraud you. And I have to tell you, given the value of the property involved, this is going to be a federal case." Federal fraud involving mineral rights on this scale falls under federal jurisdiction. The FBI will probably want to investigate how your brother knew about the deposits and whether there are other parties involved. As if summoned by our conversation, 2 black SUVs appeared on the gravel road, moving fast enough to raise dust clouds behind them. Federal agents moving quicker than I'd expected. The next several hours passed in a blur of interviews, evidence collection, and legal explanations. FBI Special Agent Lisa Morrison took detailed statements from everyone involved, while forensic accountants began examining Marcus's financial records and business connections. "Your brother made some serious mistakes," Agent Morrison explained during a break in questioning. "He left digital footprints everywhere. Phone records showing months of planning with your wife. Financial documents revealing suspicious research into mineral extraction companies. Even email correspondence with potential investors about a Montana mining opportunity." The scope of Marcus's scheme became clearer as the investigation progressed. He'd been planning to acquire my property, then immediately flip the mineral rights to a consortium of investors he'd assembled through his real estate connections. His projected profit was over $30 million. "He would have made more money stealing your inheritance than most people earn in a lifetime," Agent Morrison said. "This wasn't a simple family dispute. This was organized fraud on a massive scale." Sarah's involvement was more complicated. She'd been manipulated by Marcus, but had also actively participated in the scheme. Her tearful confession revealed months of meetings where Marcus had convinced her that I was too weak to handle serious wealth and that their affair was justified because she deserved better. "I never thought it would go this far," she sobbed during her interview. "Marcus said we were just helping Clint avoid making mistakes that would hurt everyone." But the recorded conversation from earlier that day proved she'd known exactly what they were attempting. Her marriage to me was over, and she'd likely face criminal charges for conspiracy. As evening approached, the property finally emptied of law enforcement vehicles. Frank and I sat on the front porch of my grandfather's house, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and crimson. "How are you processing all of this?" Frank asked. "Honestly, I feel like I'm living someone else's life," I replied. 3 days ago, I was a failed construction worker whose wife wanted a divorce. Now I'm sitting on one of the largest mineral deposits in the country, and my brother is in federal custody." Frank chuckled. "Your grandfather would be proud. He always said the land would reveal its secrets to the right person at the right time." My phone buzzed with a call from Agent Morrison. "Mr. Hayes, I wanted to update you on the federal investigation. We've uncovered evidence that your brother's scheme involves several other parties, including mining companies, that were prepared to extract minerals illegally if his plan had succeeded." "How is that possible?" "Turns out your brother was more connected than we initially realized. He had partnerships with companies that specialize in what they call aggressive mineral acquisition. They identify valuable properties, create legal complications that force owners to sell cheap, then extract resources as quickly as possible. The FBI investigation was revealing an entire network of criminals who targeted inherited mineral rights. Marcus had been working with them for over a year, identifying potential victims and developing strategies to acquire their properties. "You weren't just dealing with family betrayal," Agent Morrison explained. "You were the target of an organized criminal enterprise. The good news is that your evidence has helped us identify the entire network." A week later, I sat in a Denver conference room across from representatives of 3 different mining consortiums. Frank had negotiated bidding wars that drove the proposed contracts far beyond anything we'd initially expected. The winning proposal came from Pacific Renewable Resources, a company that specialized in environmentally sustainable mineral extraction. Their offer included an immediate signing bonus of $5 million, guaranteed annual royalty payments starting at $2.2 million, and environmental restoration commitments that would leave the land better than they found it. More importantly, they offered partnership opportunities that would allow me to be involved in developing new extraction technologies. My grandfather's dream of responsible resource development was finally becoming reality. As I signed the contracts surrounded by lawyers and industry experts who treated me with the respect reserved for major business partners, I thought about the journey that had brought me to this moment. Marcus was facing federal fraud charges with a minimum sentence of 15 years in prison. His real estate business had collapsed when news of his criminal activities became public. Sarah was looking at 5 years for conspiracy, and our divorce was proceeding with her receiving nothing from my inheritance due to her criminal involvement. But the real victory wasn't their downfall. It was the discovery that my father had seen something in me that I'd never seen in myself: patience, integrity, the ability to appreciate long-term value over immediate gratification. Standing in that conference room, shaking hands with people who respected my decisions and valued my partnership, I finally understood what my inheritance had really been about. It wasn't just money or mineral rights or even justice for my grandfather's vision. It was the chance to discover who I really was, when everything I'd accepted about myself turned out to be wrong. 6 months after that first night in my grandfather's hidden room, I stood in the completed restoration of his Victorian mansion, watching the sunrise through new windows that perfectly matched the original design. The house had been brought back to its former glory, using sustainable materials and modern efficiency improvements that would have made the old man proud. The restoration had become my first major project as owner of Hayes Mineral Development, the company I'd established to manage my inheritance responsibly. Every decision was guided by my grandfather's vision of creating lasting value rather than quick profits. The sustainable mining operation was exceeding all projections. Pacific Renewable Resources had developed extraction techniques that actually improved the local ecosystem while harvesting rare earth elements. The technology was so successful that other companies were licensing our methods for their own operations. Dorothy had moved into the guest house I'd built on the property, becoming the grandmother I'd never had, and the keeper of family stories I was finally ready to hear. She spent her days tending gardens that surrounded the mining operations, proving that industry and nature could coexist beautifully. "Your grandfather would be amazed by what you've accomplished," she said as we shared coffee on the wraparound porch. "He dreamed of responsible development, but even he couldn't have imagined technology this advanced. The mining royalties were generating more money than I could spend in several lifetimes, but the real satisfaction came from the work itself. I discovered a passion for geology and environmental science that felt like coming home to myself." The Hayes Foundation was funding research into sustainable extraction techniques at universities across the country. My personal life had been transformed as completely as my financial situation. Dr. Angela Foster, the geologist who'd confirmed my grandfather's surveys, had become far more than a business partner. She shared my passion for responsible resource development and my commitment to honoring the land that had given us so much. The rare earth processing facility in Billings is ahead of schedule. Angela reported, joining us on the porch with her morning coffee. They're saying it will be the most environmentally advanced operation in North America. Our relationship had grown slowly and naturally, built on shared values and mutual respect rather than the desperate need for validation that had characterized my marriage to Sarah. Angela appreciated my thoughtful approach to decision-making, the same quality that Sarah had dismissed as weakness. The legal resolution of Marcus's crimes had been swift and comprehensive. Federal prosecutors had built an airtight case against the entire mineral rights fraud network. Marcus received 18 years in federal prison, while his co-conspirators faced similar sentences. Sarah served 2 years and was currently working as a receptionist in Phoenix, our divorce long finalized. But the most satisfying justice was the complete collapse of Marcus's carefully constructed image. The real estate empire he'd built through manipulation and fraud had crumbled when his criminal activities became public. Former clients sued for damages, business partners severed relationships, and the luxury lifestyle he'd flaunted disappeared entirely. The Denver house he'd inherited was sold to pay legal fees and victim restitution. He'd lost everything he'd gained through a lifetime of taking advantage of others. Meanwhile, the property he'd tried to steal had become the foundation for sustainable wealth that would benefit generations. The Hayes Foundation was providing scholarships for geology students, funding environmental research, and supporting sustainable development projects across the Mountain West. Frank Rodriguez had become my business partner and surrogate father, teaching me everything about the mineral extraction industry while sharing stories about my grandfather's vision and determination. At 75, he was finally seeing the dream he'd helped plan for decades come to fruition. Thomas would be proud of how you've handled success, Frank said, reviewing financial reports that showed our operations were profitable beyond anyone's projections. Money didn't change you. It revealed who you really were. The community impact of our operations had been transformative. Copper Falls had grown from a dying town of 247 people to a thriving community of over 800. The jobs created by sustainable mining had attracted young families, while the environmental improvements had made the area a model for responsible development. I'd learned that real strength isn't about dominating others or grabbing immediate advantages. It's about having the patience to understand complex situations, the wisdom to seek good advice, and the integrity to honor the people who believed in you. My grandfather had spent his lifetime preparing a gift for someone he'd never met, trusting that the right person would eventually appreciate what he'd built. My father had recognized that person in me, even when I couldn't see those qualities in myself. The lesson wasn't about mineral rights or business success. It was about understanding that sometimes the greatest gifts come disguised as disappointments, and the people who love us most deeply sometimes express that love by challenging us to become better than we think we can be. Every morning when I woke up in the house my grandfather built, I remembered the man I used to be. Someone who accepted whatever others decided he deserved. Someone who let other people define his worth and determine his future. That person had died in the hidden room behind the bookshelf, surrounded by journals that revealed a family legacy of vision, patience, and hope for the future. The man who'd emerged from that room had learned to see opportunity where others saw only problems, to find strength in careful planning rather than aggressive confrontation, and to understand that the best revenge against people who underestimate you is becoming someone they could never imagine you could be. 6 months ago, Marcus had offered me $75,000 for property he thought was worthless. Today, that same property was generating over $2 million annually in sustainable royalties while supporting environmental research that would benefit the entire planet. Sarah had called me weak for not fighting for what was mine. But real strength had turned out to be recognizing that what was mine was far greater than anything I'd thought I was fighting for. The greatest gift my parents had given me wasn't an inheritance. It was the chance to discover that I was capable of honoring the dreams of people who'd loved me enough to believe in my potential. Sometimes the best thing that can happen to you is losing everything you thought you wanted so you can discover everything you never knew you needed. Looking out at the mountains that contained enough rare earth elements to power the renewable energy revolution, surrounded by people who respected my decisions and valued my partnership, I finally understood what my grandfather's journals had meant when they spoke of leaving something meaningful for future generations. He hadn't just left me mineral rights, he'd left me the opportunity to become the man I was always meant to be. Now I want to ask you something. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where everyone around you seemed to know your worth better than you did? Have you ever had people in your life who were so focused on immediate gain that they couldn't see the long-term value of patience and integrity? Share your story in the comments below. I'd love to hear about times when what seemed like the worst deal you could get turned out to be exactly what you needed. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button to help others find it. Subscribe to hear more stories about discovering hidden strength in difficult situations. And don't forget to share this with anyone who might need a reminder that their true worth isn't determined by other people's opinions. Thank you for taking this journey with me through the mountains of Montana and the hidden treasures that wait for those who have the patience to look beyond surface appearances. Remember, sometimes the greatest inheritance isn't what someone leaves you, it's what they help you discover about yourself. Until next time, keep believing that your story isn't over and the best chapters might still be waiting to be written.